This is the Fantasy Ladder Podcast, episode 24. I'm your host, Steve at Fantasy Ladder. This show is brought to you by the IDP Guys Network from idpguys.org. So, welcome back once again, my fantasy football friends and family. Let's climb the ladder of fantasy football together. So today we're going to be continuing our fan base series where I'm going to be bringing in one of my favorite people from the fantasy football community who is a big time fan of the team that we're going to be covering. Now, of course, we're doing this to add a little bit more heart and a little bit more depth to the discussion because I may not be as involved or as in the know with this team as I am with my own, which of course is the Philadelphia Eagles. But we're not talking about the Eagles today. We already did them. Today we're going to be talking about the surprisingly surging Cincinnati Bengals with the great Andrew Hall. So we're going to bring him on now. So Andrew, how you doing? And how long have you been a Bengals fan?
Oh, I'm doing great, Steve. Good to be here. I've been a Bengals fan for a little while. It's an interesting path my fandom went through. I was born in Columbus and was a Niners fan growing up because Joe Montana was just amazing, and I wanted to play on the winning team. So I got to watch him beat the Bengals twice, and I always respected him. I'm like, man, they're a good team. They just can't beat Joe Montana, but who can? He's the best, right? So then I moved to Cincinnati for school in 2000. I went to UC, and that was when I was like, all right, I'm going all in. I'm going to become a Bengals fan. And in 2000, might not have been the best year to become a Bengals fan. They were not amazingly awesome. They were not stellar. So I got to kind of labor through the Carson Palmer days and then the Andy Dalton days, and I've been a fan for over 20 years now. So yeah, it's just good that they're finally doing well and are fantasy relevant. As someone who plays fantasy, it's nice to be able to talk about my own guys for a change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. When I started playing fantasy football, like in my early high school years, this was like the peak Chad Ochocinco, who you got the jersey on the back there, and like TJ Houshmandzadeh, everything like that. So, um, in a way, I've always been like a fantasy football fan of the Bengals simply because of Ochocinco. Like, how could you not, right?
Right? Oh
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so obviously you are deeply ingrained into the fantasy football community. You are a writer for the Great Fantasy Pros, and you are a host of the Dynasty Junkies podcast. So I appreciate you coming on. So I do. So you mentioned you grew up in Columbus, so still from Ohio, I take it,
Yep. Born
and
and
you
raised.
didn't. Perfect. And you did enjoy the expo then, is that right?
Did, yeah. So it's nice. Cincinnati is where I live now, and it's a 3.5 hour drive to Canton. And I was actually up there in July for Scott Fish Bowl too. They did the live draft in Canton. They did three of them, and I was lucky enough to be in the Scott Fish Bowl, and then also lucky enough to have gotten to go to a live draft. So that was amazing. And then of course, yeah, for the expo, just a month later, I get to go back to Canton. Had a blast. It was such a fun. I mean, again, we're talking about it briefly before, but there are so many posts, so many pictures, so many people, so many memories, so many blurry memories, just such a good time. I mean, I think the the,
Yeah.
the memory that I think will stand out for me the most from this time was, we were hanging out on the patio on Saturday night. Well, we did some tailgating after the flag football game, which was not intentional, but it just ended up becoming a thing. Went to the party for a little bit on Saturday night, but then wound up back at the DoubleTree, had some cigars on the patio, closed down the bar with Keith. He shut down the bar, so I went and got the cooler out of my trunk where we were tailgating. I got the cooler of beer and brought that out to the patio at the DoubleTree, and we had some more beers until Keith kicked us out of there. And he was like, "You guys got to go inside." And it's at this point, it's like 1 or something in the morning. So we go inside to the lobby and take the beers with us and sit in the lobby and drink beers with the security guard until about 3:30 in the morning. I don't know. And I got to hang out with Bob Fish was there the whole time. Bob Lung was there the whole time. Scott Fish
Yep.
come and met up with us. Lauren Carpenter was there. Toronto Dave, Mark Shue, a bunch of people, Joe Shuey, a bunch of friends of mine that we were hanging out with, and just hanging out, drinking beers till the early hours of the morning until the security guard was like, "Okay, guys, seriously, like it's time we wrap this up." And he was a great guy, very nice, but it was like, yeah, I need to sleep anyway. I got to get up in 3 hours, so it was awesome. So yeah, it was a good time for sure.
That's good. Yeah, it's good to give you guys like a little bit of leniency, especially if you're not being rowdy. If you're just kind of keeping it cool, and so that's cool. That's really cool of them to do that. But yeah, it looked like an awesome time, and I think I need to make my way there next year because I'm only in Pennsylvania. I'm not that far away. Just need to definitely make that time and make sure the kids are sought after, grandparents or
Right.
whatever. So I'll have to plan ahead a little bit better next year. But yeah, that's
Carpool.
really
That's the
neat.
way to do it. Make like a whole thing, right? There are a bunch of like Rocky, my co-host on Junkies. He's from the Philly area, and I know he carpooled with some other guys from the New Jersey area. I know Zach Reed came from Maine and kind of drove the whole way down and carpooled with them all over. So,
There
get a
you go.
couple buddies and figure out a way to get over here because it's totally worth it. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, you can cut the gas down that way too, and all that.
Exactly. It
So
makes it more fun too. You know what I mean? Like now you're not driving alone. You're talking football the whole time before you get here. It's a lot more fun.
awesome, awesome. Yeah. So speaking of the Scott Fish Bowl and the avatars and everything, your current avatar is the Hall of Fame from Canton. Like you said, you're
Yep.
in that division. It's funny when I associate different people in the community, like the Scott Fishbowl 11 time frame was like such a big wave for me. That was my first fishbowl. Obviously, you've been in a handful of them, but I
Yep.
do recall very clearly yours because you had like the old screaming old picture of yourself
That's
put
right.
into the Incubus album called Science, and I'm like, ooh, he probably likes Incubus. He must like them enough to put his face on an album. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, would you say that they're your favorite band, or just like a favorite band, or what's that level of
Easily,
fandom like?
easily one of my favorite bands. I mean, I don't. I'm one of those people that's like when you say what's your favorite, it varies day to day, and it kind of depends on the mood. And I mean, there were a lot of really good band options in Scott Fishbowl 11, and there were so many good choices. And I was like, kind of want to go with something a little bit less popular, like not quite as on the nose. And I
Yeah.
really wanted Live. That was the one I was hoping for. Live is one of my all-time favorites.
Oh
And
man.
so I thought for sure I might have a chance with that, but nah. So I went with Incubus, which I was a big fan of. Yeah, Science is one of my favorite albums of all time. That one I can listen to start to finish. Takes me right back to my high school days and just driving around Columbus where I grew up and everything. So yeah, that was
I
one of
love
those
it.
that just I figured why not? Let's go with Incubus and make myself into something. You know what I mean? Like let's do something fun with it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun this whole year actually. Getting to know a lot more Incubus fans, and I got out my old ticket stubs and everything. Was showing that to the Incubus chat when we were all in there together. So it was cool to
That's
meet other
awesome.
Incubus fans. I love that aspect of it. So yeah, it was great.
It's a funny thing because it is one of these things. If you say what's your favorite, it could be very different depending on the season. So my next question was going to be like, what is your favorite Incubus song? And before you even answer, I couldn't even come up with just one myself. So I have a
Yeah.
handful. So I just want to see where we kind of like come together there. So I'll just read off mine, but then I'm going to hear from probably a more true fan from you, where you like. So my, I mean, you got Drive, obviously. That's like a big one. For me, like a personal favorite was Privilege on Make
Yes.
Yourself, and then Aqueous Transmission on
Oh
Morning
yeah.
View. Those are probably like top top tier, like just from like a personal standpoint. But I also still really like the song Dig and Promises Promises. But I mean, Make Yourself is
Yes.
just full of great songs too. So where do you line up? Is there like a one clear cut choice, or do you have like a kind of a group there of some you like?
Well, I mean that whole era from like Science, Make Yourself, Morning View, that is kind of my sweet spot. I know Curl After the Murder is one I wasn't quite as big into. I did really like it. Don't get me wrong; it's still a great album. But I mean, some of the ones that stand out. I mean, obviously, Pardon Me. That one just hits so hard. It was such a good song. It was popular. Kind of more obscure is like A Certain Shade of Green. That one always seems to get me. It just fits me in the right mood. Like it just gets me going. And then like
Okay.
on the softer side is I Miss You. Like there's something about I Miss You that just like I don't know, just kind of in the right vibe. I just love that. So those are kind of that same range. I know Light Grenades was really good. There's a couple in there that are really big fans of in that area too. So it just yeah, but those are probably my top ones. But again, it hit me on the right day. I might like Clean a lot more than others. I love that one on Make Yourself. What was the other one? I was just thinking about it. I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, there's a ton of those. There's a ton. There's no wrong answer to that question.
Yeah, another big one for me was like Stellar on Make Yourself. Yeah, I mean, really great, but yeah, it was something I listened to a lot more of like years ago, and then just kind of found and discovered other things. But seeing that, like that really stood out to me to have like your face on that album. I was like, oh, that's awesome. So, but either way, appreciate that.
For
So what
sure.
we are going to be talking about, of course, in this show is the Cincinnati Bengals, your Cincinnati Bengals. So basically, what we're going to do is go through a summary of last season, summarize their free agency moves, NFL draft selections, and then take a look ahead to the 2022 season, look at the outlook in terms of how they'll do in real life, but also the offensive players that we are going to be targeting or fading for fantasy football, at least for this season or beyond. So we will get into that in a bit. But for now, we're going to start with a summary of the 2021 season. So the Bengals finished, which was a welcome surprise to me personally, with a 10-7 record. They were first in the AFC North, typically a very tough division there. So that was very impressive. They did have a very impressive points versed and points allowed ratio. They, of course, had the deep playoff run with a very competitive appearance in the Super Bowl, but unfortunately came up a little bit short there against the LA Rams. The Bengals, to me, just really demonstrated the romanticism that exists in sports and turned a big page for the franchise's book as head coach Zach Taylor is no longer on the hot seat, which I believed he very well could have been going into last season. So, Andrew, if you could take me back to the Super Bowl, like from a fan's perspective, right? You are just a longtime fantasy player. You're just a pretty objective guy, a very level-headed guy. But just as a fan in this like kind of a spot where there's this brutal too long wait leading up to the game, where were you in that time? Were you anxious? Were you pretty excited, optimistic, or pessimistic?
Well, I'll even go back further because I think it paints a better picture. So at the beginning of last year, I mean, if you all the way go back even to last draft, there was the Penei Sewell or Jamar Chase discussion.
That's
And
right.
I was on Team Sewell for a while until about the week leading up to the draft. And I was like, you know what? Jamar Chase is generational. When are you ever going to get a chance to get the Burrow and his receiver from college and all this? So I was like, he hasn't played for a year, but I think this is the guy. And then I liked the Jamar pick. I thought it was smart. And then, of course, there was all the drama in fantasy and in NFL about how Jamar Chase can't catch the ball, right? Can't see it without the stripes and all these other
Oh,
things.
it's
Like
nuts.
going into the year, it was just like, oh, here we go. Classic Bengals, right? Like we're going to bungle this one too. And there was a lot of discussion about if that pick didn't work out, Zach Taylor might be getting the axe. And I know I've talked about this with a bunch of other Bengals fans on podcasts and over beers and everything. It's just like I remember thinking, this is it. It's Zach's got 1 year to figure this out, and we got to do something with it. And then yeah, like you said, we went 10-7, won the AFC North. What a ride! I got to go to that Raiders Bengals game as a season ticket holder. I got to get tickets to that.
Very
I'm not
nice.
ashamed to admit it. I'm pretty sure I got COVID from that game, but it was totally worth it because we won. Phenomenal game. Had a great time.
Yeah.
Again, January and playing football in January in Cincinnati just doesn't happen very often. We're not very familiar with that. So that right there was kind of the start of what I would say was a Cinderella season. I'm like, oh, they won that the monkey's off their back, right? They finally can text somebody that they won a playoff game, like all that stuff was about. And then they go to Tennessee, and I remember thinking, well, even if we lose here, it's a good season. And they won. And it was like, man, all right, now we're going on to face, oh no, it's the Chiefs. Oh, great. Now we're going to Arrowhead. We're going to Kansas City. And the first
Yeah.
half of that game was brutal. And then they come back and win it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is it, the best season ever. And now we're going to the Super Bowl and we're playing against the Rams. We could beat the Rams. Who knows? So yeah, I mean, it was a ride. Honestly, that's the only way I can put it. It was so much fun. It was ups and downs, but then the end of the season, just that winning streak, the way that we finished. And then, of course, to come up a little short, but still put up a hell of a fight in the Super Bowl. You know, Rams are a stellar team. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from them. They definitely won that game. There were some calls that went both ways, as usual in the Super Bowl, with everybody watching, all eyes on them. You know, like there were some iffy calls both directions. But man, just to come up 3 points short in the Super Bowl, it hurt. I'm not going to lie. But it was still a hell of a lot better than I expected 6 months prior. So I'll take it. I'm happy with it. I got a bunch of AFC North gear. I got a bunch of AFC Championship gear. You know, I don't know if I'm going to see that again. It's hard as hell to get there. So I was just happy to be a part of it and to be a fan for a change and not have to worry about fantasy stuff for a few months was kind of nice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's such an odd experience because like when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl a couple years back, it just those 2 weeks, I just couldn't wait for it to start, but I also was like so frightened just to
Yeah.
get like potentially clobbered by like Tom Brady again. So and maybe that's just me being like a jaded like
Eh.
Philadelphia fan, just always like expecting to be miserable. I don't know, but I mean, I do know that just on Twitter, especially, you are just a very reasonable, level-headed guy. I remember you took the loss very well. At least I remember
Thank
you
you.
tweeting about just being very like just full of gratitude for the run that they were on. And I think that's probably the correct way to handle that sort of a thing. But this thing of fandom is like you can really swing high, you can really swing low. And there's been times where I've been like literally upset over a loss for like
Oh yeah.
weeks. And it's just like I'm just at a place now where I can't let that like affect my life at like to that level anymore. It gets like ridiculous. So obviously I'll be very happy, if the Eagles win or whatever in one fashion or another, but like that the loss isn't gonna affect me so deeply. So it seems like you handled it well, but just definitely overall very, very appreciative of what they were able to do. It was a very interesting question you brought up at the very beginning there about the Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell. debacle, right? I was definitely on the Sewell side of things. I'm like, well, you just gotta protect Joe Burrow at
Protect
all
Burrow. Yep.
costs. I just did not think that they were like a Jamar Chase away from being a top contender. Like it's just phenomenal. It was just a really just a lot of fun to see. So with that big swing in the Bengals' favor at this point, things are looking pretty good at least in their division and stuff. I mean, you still got the Ravens to deal with and everything, but some changes in Cleveland, obviously, and Pittsburgh. Um, what's your level of anticipation like for this year?
Well, I mean, even just to go back for a second too, that I think I took the loss to the Super Bowl better because it was like, well, we're second in the NFL. That's pretty damn good, right? I took the losses to the Jets and the Browns like really hard. Like those are terrible teams. How are we losing to them? So to spin that
Yeah.
forward, I'm looking forward to beating the Browns this year, right? That's honestly that's where my mind goes as a Bengals fan. They're one of our rivals. I mean, the whole AFC North is rivals with each other. We just beat each other up, and it's
Yep.
just we're all great fans too. I'll be honest. There's a lot of fans for all those teams that I respect and kind of enjoy trash talking with throughout the weeks and everything. But I want to beat the Browns. I want to beat the Ravens, and I want to beat the Steelers. I'd love to do all three at home where I'm going to be there because I've got season tickets. That'll be great. But I know also 10-7 was a battle. That was we had to work our butts off to get to 10-7. And part of me thinks that I don't want to say that's as good as we can do because I do think we can go better than that. But I do know how much of a challenge it is to win 10 games in this league. It's not easy. The competition is ridiculous. So my
Right.
level of anticipation is obviously I want to do better than last year, but the only spot better is winning the Super Bowl. That seems like a heavy ask. So I'm not really going to do that. I am anticipating winning the AFC North again. That's pretty much where I'm at with this. As long as we win our division and kind of show the NFL in general that we are not a joke, that we're not a fluke, that we deserve to be in the contest in the playoffs and everything like that. We deserve to have a chance to vie for this title. That's all I really want. So where I'm at right now is I'm in a pretty good spot, still kind of living off that high. Because again, that was only 6 months ago that we were in the Super Bowl. That's pretty crazy to me that we only had 6 months off. Again, usually the Bengals take off the end of December because we're already out of it. So it's kind of nice to have, such a quick turnaround for us. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. I just think as long as we can win the AFC North, I'll be happy. Let's do better, but that's what I want for a minimum.
Yeah, no, so I think you're correct in that you do have high expectations for the team, and that can definitely drive the anticipation going into the season. Yeah, it's interesting. Like just that concept of like expectation can really make a big difference in how much you enjoy like that. I mean, and that's the best part about playing fantasy football. It's like if our favorite team isn't doing so hot, we at least can fall back on our fantasy teams, and you still enjoy football either way. But it's just a little extra nice, a little easier to watch, like the primetime game if your team wins in the afternoon.
Oh,
But
for sure.
but
Well,
yeah,
just to
I
kind of tie
know.
it together for a second, even on that, I have I don't even know how many official teams I have. I think it's like 15 or 16 that I set lineups for, and I've
Yep.
got Jamar Chase in 7 of them. Right, so like
Oh,
I'm just kind of going all in with my team. Hey,
there you go.
if I win, my team wins. I'm happy. If the Bengals lose and my fantasy team loses, on to next week. Right, like let's just pack it in. So like it kind of makes it fun too to have, like I said at the end intro, even like it's kind of nice to have Bengals players that people want and that people are talking about and that are like, Jamar Chase is in the top 3 wide receiver conversation in redraft, top 1 or 2, even maybe in dynasty.
Oh yeah,
Burrow's a top 5 quarterback. You got Mixon a top 10 running back. I mean, like it's just Higgins is a top 12 receiver in most rankings too. So it's like, just what a year to be a Bengals fan. It's just, I have nothing but positivity here. Now, again, if we go, I don't know, like 3-14 and look ridiculous and there's no injuries and we just play badly, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt real bad. So we got to win something. That's for sure.
definitely. Yeah, and again, just being a long living Philadelphia sports fan, just that expectation management for me is just so critical of my enjoyment for the season overall. Like when we had Andy Reid, it was like, well, we are a contender at least for the division. So the last season that he was the head coach, where they went like 4-12 or something, it was a rough year. I mean,
Yeah.
it all just was bad. And then, then like the Chip Kelly and all that happened. But either way, yeah. So my level of anticipation that season was probably too high. And then it was this big crash and burn where last year I was more neutral going into my expectations with the new head coach, seeing what Jalen Hurts can do. It's like, oh, cool. Like we had a winning record. Was not anticipating that. We made the playoffs. Was
Right.
not anticipating that. So And that was kind of like, I just was kind of looking ahead to like the draft. I figured like we weren't going to be good. We might get 6 wins, at best. So I'm just like really studying up on like the college players, but pleasant surprise. But I do think at this point, I mean, honestly, for both of our teams, but especially the Bengals, you want to have a higher expectation and therefore have a little bit more extra level of excitement from the anticipation level. So
Well,
I
I am
definitely
trying
like
to
where you're
temper
at.
it though a little bit. Like I don't want to get too excited and set a high bar and then we can't meet it. So I'm kind of like I'm realistically like toning it back. All right, hang on. Let's just keep it in the sights here. Let's win this game. That's what we say all last season. That's what we were talking about. Like especially in the playoffs. Like just look at the one game in front of you. And I think that our team stood up really well. We brought back everybody that matters and added a good offensive line. So I don't know how we'd be any worse. Again, barring injury, knock on wood. We don't want any of those. But that's kind of the way the NFL is. Get lucky, get hot at the right time, make it to the Super Bowl. We can do it again. Why not? If not us, who? Come on, we can do it.
Absolutely, yeah. But no, you mentioned about the additions to the offensive line. That is a brilliant transition into the recap of the free agency moves. So some of the key losses, just as far as I'm concerned, the veteran tight end CJ Uzama, a little bit older left tackle Riley Reef, just kind of was he only on the team like 1 year or 2 years?
I
It
think it
was
was
kind of a
2 years. Yeah, it
stay.
was a free
Okay,
agency signing to kind of fill the gap, and because we had some injuries with Jonah Williams and other stuff on the left side. So yeah,
that's
I
right.
mean,
That's
he was
right.
kind of a stopgap. I don't know if he was really going to be a lifer. He's a journeyman, offensive lineman, good player, nothing against him, but I don't know. I mean, again, key losses is definitely true, but eh, like
In the long term, probably not nothing too major, but especially because of who they brought in. Then I'll just kind of throw in that they did not retain wide receiver Auden Tate,
that's
someone
right.
who I just felt never quite had a, or maybe you could correct this statement. I always thought he deserved a better chance at making something happen, but in Atlanta, who knows? So either way, a big body receiver, always a lot of potential there, but maybe there's other things going on that I'm not
Well,
aware of.
I'll put
But
it this way. I actually really like Auden Tate too. I think he's a terrific
okay,
receiver, terrific athlete, and all this. That's kind of why I was on Team Sewell at the beginning of the draft. I'm like, I think we can roll out Higgins, Boyd, and Tate and be okay. I think that's not
right,
the end of the world. And then, of course, getting Sewell to protect Burrow was the logic everybody said. But
that's
the
right.
more I thought about it, the more it kind of led up to that. I was like, you know what? If we get Chase, that's Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. I mean, Higgins being our two is just that's going to be tough to cover. And then it's like, who knows if Sewell's really that good at blocking in the NFL? Like, there's so many college players that come up that don't do well. I'm like, I'd really rather see us address the offensive line in free agency, which last year we really didn't do. Which again was, for whatever it's worth, it was like we weren't sure what we were getting into. And I think that the team is not necessarily want to spend money. We've always been pretty thrifty as a franchise. So I think they were kind of thinking, well, we got at least a couple years till Burrow and Chase need contracts. Let's see how this plays out. And then, yeah, this year they sure as heck went and spent some money, which I'm going to let you additions here. This is what we're getting into. This is the good stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So obviously you touched on the additions to the offensive line. They take Alex Kappa away from the Buccaneers. They take Lyle Collins away from the Cowboys. I especially like that one. So thank you. And then Ted Harris, I believe from New England,
Yep.
unless I'm wrong about that. And then they brought in tight end Hayden Hurst. So I think he's already an upgrade to CJ Uzama. No offense to him. I just happen to be a big fan of Hayden Hurst as a
Same.
player, but just in general, he's an awesome guy, awesome story. If you're familiar with his like mental
Yeah.
health background and stuff, a tremendous story. If anyone hasn't looked into that, I recommend you check it out. Really powerful stuff. And then they also retained a lot of defensive starters. There was just kind of a lot of shuffling on the offensive line or the defensive line there,
Yeah.
but they retained a decent chunk of the starters. So
Well, I want to
uh,
jump in with something on that though. There were a couple little things. Like obviously we everybody saw the Bengals defense get exposed in the Super Bowl with Eli Apple, right? Like he got beat by Cup so many times, and everybody was like, "Man, what does this guy get him off the field?" I still think Eli Apple is a starter in the NFL. I don't think he's a top starter. He's a good flex kind of position for the defense. A good nickel corner, that kind of thing. And then of course we got Jesse Bates, who's our starting safety, who's holding out right now. He's the only holdout I believe remaining. He's got the franchise tag and has decided not to play. There's a lot of discussion about in town, at least, about how he wants a new contract before he signs, before he steps on the field, and he's not willing to get hurt before getting that contract. I totally respect that, and I think
right.
I heard one of the other Bengals podcasts. I think it might have been which one was it? It was hear the podcast growling. I think is the one from the Athletic, and they were saying something like, "This is the nicest holdout you're ever going to see." right? He's in contact with the team. He's texting
Right.
everybody. He texted his so to speak replacement Dax Hill, who we'll get into in a little bit, but he's been texting the defense and staying in touch. He was just at the preseason game this past week in a suite. Like he's paying attention. He's around the team. He's around the city. But I kind of get it from his side. Like he's the stud of this defense, and I don't think it's wrong of him to ask to get paid. I just really hope that he comes back and is ready to go by week one. Because obviously missing time like this is not ideal. I'd rather him practicing than sitting on the couch, potentially getting rusty, like, and then if they do sign him, he comes back, but he goes too quick, he hurts himself. There's a whole bunch of risk with that. So I just hope they come to an agreement at some point and he's back on the field for at least the last preseason game against the Rams. That'd be nice. But just again, that's the only real question mark left is that defensive starter question. Like if he doesn't come back, we might have to start Hill, which again, not the end of the world, but God, or Cam Taylor Britt again, not bad either. But like I'd much rather have Jesse Bates back there protecting the defense. So we'll see. That's the only one that makes me kind of go, please.
So do you believe that he would be worth like a longer term contract? Because I think that's what he's obviously wants. He doesn't want to play on the tag. Do you think he'd be worth it to sign long term?
I do. I think the question that I have is, he is a top tier safety, but if he's going to want a new contract, it's going to be a massive contract. He's going to want like a top 5 safety payday. And I don't know if he's worth that. And then also keep in mind, the Bengals have got to pay Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow and potentially T Higgins coming up here all in a row. So, I mean, there is some logic in saying, well, maybe we try to skimp a little somewhere and maybe Jesse Bates is the odd man out. I know I've heard a lot of rumors that maybe T Higgins will be the odd man out because you got to keep the Burrow Chase connection. So there's a whole bunch of question marks with the salary cap and everything else that's going on there. And then again, like I said before, we're a very frugal franchise. We've always been pretty, penny conscious. So going to the Super Bowl really helped. Obviously, that gave us a lot of publicity, got us more name out there. We just sold the naming rights to Paul Brown Stadium for the first time. It's Paycor Stadium now. So hopefully that gives the owners, the Brown family, a little bit more money in their coffers to spend on the right people in the right places. So I'm hoping that they're smart with it. I don't want them going crazy and, spending some money we don't have. But I do think there is a potential. I think he signs. I think that it's just going to be less than for what he wants. I'm guessing like a 3-year deal. I don't know. I don't know what kind of dollars. I don't even want to speculate. But I think it's tough to sign that kind of player to a long-term deal, knowing the big contracts we have coming up. They don't want to lock themselves in anything with a massive 4th year coming up. Like that just could be tough to work around. So we'll see. I have optimism that it'll get done now.
Yeah, you see these scenarios a lot where teams are just like forced to make these like tough like business decisions. Like the one like really notable one that affected the Eagles was the Titans trading AJ Brown to the Eagles with the guarantee that the Eagles were going to extend him. Where the Titans probably were a little iffy on because obviously they recognize he's a phenomenal player, but has been a little bit banged up over his career. So then they go with the alternative, cheaper version of him in Treylon Burks, if you will. So that is just like a tough business decision. Not great for the fan base. They're going to miss, AJ Brown. Obviously, they're going to welcome in Burks with open arms. But it is just one of these like, well, we think he can have the same kind of a mold in the offense, but just for fractions of the cost, Yep. So it's just a tough thing to kind of work with. It's like not every team can function like the Yankees or whatever. You know what I mean? So
I think a lot of times people forget that there is a business behind this, right? It's not just made up money. It's not a Madden franchise or you can just sign a guy and move on. Like this is actual money these teams are spending. So I think that especially with the way the Bengals have been the last 5 years, let's say, I think they've done a really good job of transitioning to this next generation. I know Mike Brown was in charge for a long time and you can kind of tell, right? It just felt like we were all kind of old and stodgy right in the middle every year. And that's just not where you want to be. So I love the move of going to Zach Taylor, a young coach who could be our coach for 20, 30 years if he does this right. He's only 40 something, he's about my age at this point. So that's kind of nuts. But again, like getting the younger family involved and kind of bringing them in. And then like Katie Blackburn, the whole Blackburn family's done a tremendous job really engaging with the fans in the last few years and the whole Burrow, thing and now Paycor Stadium. And like, we're really changing the atmosphere around the team. And so again, maybe it's time to do that. Maybe we wouldn't have done that in the past. Let's do the opposite. So maybe that's what we're going to see and again, I'm hoping so, but as an Eagles fan, I'm sure you've seen a whole bunch of that kind of stuff too, where it's like, they don't always do the smart thing, right? Like the fallacy of rational coaching, as we say a lot in fantasy. It's like, well, of course they're going to do that because that makes sense. And then they go out there and the guy doesn't get any carries. And you're like, what? How come he's the best? Fallacy of rational coaching. That not all coaching is rational. Sometimes Trey Sermon gets benched. Sometimes Zach Moss gets benched. Like we don't know what's going on either. So yeah, we're all just guessing and speculating. But I do think it's going to be a fun couple of years coming up here to see how this all turns out.
Yeah, I know you're a fan of Chris Harris as well. On his podcast, he always says we can't legislate usage, right?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
that is, and especially in the Eagles, they just have had this committee approach since Chip Kelly, and it just makes you want to beat your head into the wall. But is that better for the players' longevity in the league and keeping them fresh and all this? Probably frustrating for fantasy, but not everyone can be like Derrick Henry. You know what I mean? So it's just a tough thing. But I think getting those offensive linemen was just absolute perfection because they were able to pivot away from Sewell, get Chase. They bring in very good offensive linemen to shore up the offensive line through free agency, and then they could focus on other areas for the team in the draft. So I think that just was done in spectacular fashion. So again, they were able to get like you said, a generational wide receiver player in Jamar Chase and still fill in those gaps of what was definitely needed on the offensive line. And then in the draft, they're picking late. Pick
Yeah,
31. They
that
took
was interesting.
safety. Yeah, definitely. It's always a weird thing when
It's
like
like, when's our pick? What the heck? Yeah, we're usually done by now. Yeah.
right, that's right. Yeah. But at 31, as you referenced, they took safety Daxton Hill, and then in round two that they stuck with the with the defensive unit or in the secondary cornerback
Yep.
Cam Taylor Britt. They focused on defense once again. Defensive tackle Zach Carter in the third round. Fourth round, guard Cordell Volson. Round five, safety Tyson Anderson. Then round seven, edge rusher Jeffrey Gunter. So I want to hear your thoughts on this draft class, and do you have a favorite or a least favorite pick? Were there any players at that same position or at different positions you would have preferred where they selected?
Well, I mean, after the last few years, I feel like Bengals fans have been spoiled, right? We got Burrow and Higgins in 2020, and then we got Jamar Chase in 21. It's like we're just getting these stud guys with amazing pedigrees and all this flash. I mean, like lots of jerseys sold and all this. And then this year, again, picking late. I didn't hate Dax Hill. I didn't think that was a bad pick. I thought it was actually a pretty smart idea to go safety there just in case Bates doesn't sign or to kind of put some fire under him. I mean, again, you can
Yeah,
think of it as like drafting his replacement or his partner. It's hard to say. I mean, safeties are interesting like that. And then again, going back to the well with Cam Taylor Britt, I thought that was an interesting move too. Taylor Britt's one of those guys that can kind of play all over. So he could easily be a corner for us in the inside and play the safety kind of role on the nickel like Eli Apple does if he doesn't pan out. So I love those two picks for depth. And again, for where our team is coming out of the Super Bowl, I feel like depth is the one thing we needed. So I was very happy with that. I know I really wanted Tyler Linderbaum. I believe that was his name, the center. I was
yeah,
really
right.
excited to see him fall. And then, of course, Ravens get him. And I'm like, oh, God, not the Ravens, like anybody but the freaking Ravens. Like I was actually just
Yeah,
talking about that with somebody at the expo. Like the Ravens just seem for whatever reason to constantly get like amazing values at the draft.
yeah.
So yeah, I didn't hate any of that. And I'll be honest too, like Cordell Volson's looked pretty solid at guard. He played pretty well in the first preseason game. I'm really curious to see what he does with the first team and with more reps. Jackson Carman did not look very good, and he was kind of the supposed left guard that we had. The only real question mark we have heading into camp is Jackson. Is he going to be the guy? And now the answer looks like maybe not, or maybe that's what he needed to kind of realize he does need to get moving. I don't know, but I don't think Volson's a bad pick. And again, even Jeffrey Gunter's looked great. He looked great in the first game too. So I think the
Oh,
team
good.
did a really good job drafting team players and guys that can fill a role, but they're not going to be names you hear every day, which totally fine with that. That's the way to be on defense. You don't want to hear your name called on defense. It's a bad day if you are. Usually it's with flags and penalties and other things. So we don't need the drama. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm definitely happy with the draft for sure.
yeah, it's like you definitely want the opposite of the Eli Apple effect, right? Who
Yes.
already that there's been some like training camp videos of him getting like burned by Chase, which is understandable. It's Jamar Chase, right? But like, but either way, that's where you don't want to be named, right? Or like, I remember in the NFC Championship game, Jaquiski Tart dropped that
Yeah.
interception late. I mean, now everyone knows his name for all the wrong reasons, right? So no, you're right. That's a fantastic point. But if they just do what they got to do, and you don't notice them, that's probably for the
Well,
better.
here's the thing
Yeah.
that cracks me up too about Eli Apple, and I was kind of harping on him a little bit in the Super Bowl. Right? Everybody knows his name because he got beat so bad. Do you know who the guy was that stopped Tyreek Hill at the 1 yard line in the championship game? Eli Apple. Like it's the weirdest thing. Like he doesn't get any of that recognition. He only gets all this harping because he did badly. So that's kind of what I mean. Like when you do it well, it's like, well, yeah, that's your job. Good job. Get off the field, right? When you do it badly, everybody's like, what is this guy? Who is this? Why is he here? You know what I mean? So just You don't want the attention on you. And that's what I love about the defense. And I think all of these guys, I mean, even Zach Carter, who I haven't seen too much of yet myself, I haven't watched a lot of his tape, but I mean, even that's a defensive tackle. Like, we didn't need that. That's just a good depth piece. I love that. Like, that's a smart draft. So I'm happy with it.
I love it. Yeah, yeah. You want to be like a janitor, just like a thankless
Yes.
job, but you definitely serve a good purpose for what you're doing. You know what I mean? I can
Mhm.
speak to that. My very first job was a custodian at my high school, so I have mad respect for it. People who have to do that
Oh,
because
yeah.
that is not a fun job. But either way, just as long as you blend in and you do your thing, then only when there's a mess is all the stinking janitor or whatever. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
so
I hear you.
that's Eli Apple. He needs to do that. But either way, I do like that perspective. I completely agree with that. I like that. So now, very good free agency, very good draft. Looking ahead now to the 2022 season, what do you think is a realistic expectation for wins and losses after reviewing the Bengals schedule?
17-0, baby, right? Like, this is the time of year where you go hot take season. No, I'm kidding. There's no way. I do think that the way that our division's set up with all the teams being pretty stellar and always beating each other up, I'm honestly, and this is going to sound weird, I'm okay with going 3-3 in the division. I just feel like that's kind of the minimum in my book. I don't think going 4-2 is it's possible. Of course, anything's possible, but realistically, like, these teams just beat each other up. So I'll say 3-3 there, and then the thing I think that I don't know if it gets overlooked or just ignored or just nobody cares, but last year we were such a bad team in 2019 or 2020 with Joe Burrow and the COVID year and all this. We were not great. So our schedule in 2021 was really light. We were playing the third best team, I believe, in every conference. Now, because
Hmm.
of the championship run, we're playing the first team in every conference last year. So our schedule got a lot tougher just because we were a lot better. So that's kind of why, again, like, in theory, you could say, well, we went 10-7, we should be better. We're playing better players, we're playing better teams. It's going to be tough. So I'm still willing to say 10-7 is kind of, like I said, our floor. I still think 10-7 winning the title for the AFC North is fine with me. Even if you look and go really hardcore and kind of pick games and sort of predict, when it gets into the winter, it's impossible to predict. I mean, you got Cleveland coming to Cincinnati on December 11th. I know I'm excited for that game, but by then, who knows what Cleveland's going to be looking like? They have a lot of question marks, obviously, around Deshaun Watson and everything else. But, like, if he gets an 8-game suspension, he'll be playing in that game. And will he be
Right.
rusty? Will he be fine? What about injuries that always happen in the season to all teams? Like, not just any. Like, so again, it's so impossible to predict where teams are going to be in December. And then you add in the cold weather and random weather days. We saw it last year with a bunch of games. It just gets snowed out, or it's like super rainy, and then all of a sudden it's 9-6. And it's like, who knows who's? I mean, so again, I don't
Yeah.
like predicting all seasons, but I
Yeah.
feel like we're at least a 10-7 team again, which might
Okay.
sound like I'm down on them. But again, if I'm winning the same games playing harder teams, I'm happy with that.
I like that. Okay. So you think 10-7 is good enough to win
That's
the
my
division then?
realistic projection. Yeah, if you want me
Okay.
optimism, I'm probably going 14-3. I think they're the only teams that we lose to are in the division, which I think, again, is a little ridiculous, right? Like, only losing the 3 games in the division and winning everything else, it doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
even then, like, going 14-3 is so hard to do. Like, even the Chiefs don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, that's such a tough thing to pull off. So I think 10-7 is very respectable in this kind of NFL, with a 17-game season and everything. I mean, it was like a 9-7, now 10-7, or maybe 10-6. Now it's 10-7. I mean, those are all good. 10-6 used to be a terrific record.
Oh
Now all
yeah.
of a sudden 10-7 isn't. Like, no, come on, that's just one extra loss. But that's the way the NFL is going. You got to rise to the top.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very interesting and tough division, as we stated. So like just last year, Bengals went 10-7. The Steelers went 9-7-1, just squeaked into the playoffs there.
Yep.
And then the Ravens and the Browns both went 8-9. There was suboptimal play in Pittsburgh. With that, there's injuries to Baker Mayfield and a little bit of that. And then Baltimore, Lamar Jackson for
Oof.
the back half of the
Dobbins, of
season.
course, too. Yeah.
Dobbins and Gus Edwards,
Yep.
who I just was just devastated at both of those, But either way, uh, obviously not as much as them or like their families do to me, but either
Right. Right.
way,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but even with that, it was still a very tight division. But I do think that there is reason to think that Pittsburgh can stay. I don't know if 9-7 is. I don't know. I think that would be like that would have to be like pretty optimistic, right? I think
I agree.
if anything, the Ravens will probably be the biggest um, uh, opponent to take the division, if not the Bengals, right? So I think the Bengals are in a pretty good
Yeah.
spot. Although there are a lot of changes and a lot of question marks still around the Ravens themselves, including the health of the running back still, but definitely a big change to their offense without Hollywood Brown and everything else. So it is a very interesting spot. So I do agree with you there that 10-7 could be a possibility to win the division. My only roadblock would probably be Baltimore, and I know like the Baltimore
Yeah.
fans out there are very confident that they're maybe overconfident in like Lamar Jackson's ability to do what. I mean, he's phenomenal, but there is a confidence that comes there, so it is a little scary, right? But I do think that it's going to come down to one of those two. But still extremely intrigued to see, what Mitch Trubisky is going to be like, or if we see Kenny Pickett this season, and obviously in Cleveland, how many games is Brissett going to start, and then on the other side of that, Watson and everything else. But that's a completely different team you have to game plan for if it's Watson compared to Brissett,
Oh yeah.
obviously. So it's just a very fascinating division as always. And my wife is a Steelers fan, so
I'm sorry to hear that. I had no idea.
it is what it is. It was not a
Especially
deal
like
breaker.
a bit like Philly, Pittsburgh. That's got to just divide your whole house. That's got to be brutal.
So we met at Penn State. So that was our
Oh,
common
perfect. Okay.
ground.
So yeah,
So
and then you go in and perfect. I get it.
yeah, yeah. So I just see it as it's just like double the football to enjoy, right? But I mean, if
Okay.
if she were like a Cowboys fan, I mean, we just wouldn't be married. But that's a whole other story. So I could put up with that to a certain degree. But we at least had that like Penn State connection there. But
Yeah, I like
um,
it.
the other thing I wanted to comment on, like it can be very difficult for teams to like replicate success when there has been inconsistency in success over time. Some of the examples that I was just kind of thinking of off the top of my head were like the Jaguars in 2018 and the Panthers in 2016. At least the Panthers in that era had a couple of division titles and some playoff runs and stuff, but they definitely fell off a cliff after the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not comparing the Bengals right now to what the Jaguars were then, in 2018. Um, do
Fair.
you think that because of the way the team is set up, that they are still going to be set up for success, or do you think it is a possibility that they could turn into like the old Bengals again, even with all the talent that they have? Is that
Honestly,
something that scares you, or are you worried about that, or do you just think it's not really going to happen?
I'm not. I mean, I'm not that worried about it. I think the AFC is just a brutal place to play football right now. I mean, there's I don't know. Let's even say like there's 8 of the 16 teams that could be in the Super Bowl. That's nuts, right? In the NFC, there's like 3. You know what I mean? Like there's just such a difference.
Yeah,
I mean, this year again, we get to play the Chiefs and the Bills this year, both at home. Like those 2 games will decide a lot about what we're going to do as a team. If we get crushed by either one, and again, who knows, right? I mean, the Bills we play in Week 17. I think it is January 2nd. And it's like, man, we're just gonna, that game is gonna decide our season potentially, right? Right at the end of the year there. So if we can play up to our talent and up to our competition, even, I think we're gonna be fine for a couple of years here. What makes me nervous is, as always, is injuries and like playing together as a unit. I mean, we just added pretty much a whole new offensive line. They haven't really had a chance to play together yet in this preseason. Collins has had some back injuries and other things, and obviously, I'd rather him be healthy than risk it. And we had Kappa and Karras that both had their own little issues and all this, and I don't think either one of them played much of at all in the preseason, the first game. And it's just like, are they going to come together and gel in time to get where Burrow needs to be, who just had an appendectomy and hasn't seen the field much himself? So I feel like some of this stuff again is coming off that short turnover hangover. Like we're used to having 8 months, we've only got 6 because of the Super Bowl in February. So yeah, I mean, part of it is it's going to be how we start, but in my mind, to show how long this team is going to be good, it's going to be how we finish. Right? Last year we came together strong at the end. Everybody played together. I felt like the team gelled really well right when it mattered. And that's always the case. So if we can do that again, I mean, if we can play well in December and January and I don't know, go 10-6, 10-7 at the end of the year there and get to the playoffs and maybe win another game and kind of show the world, hey, we're not kidding around here, then I think that really goes a long way to help with the confidence, both on the field and off. You get like Collins is a prime example. Collins would not have come to the Bengals if we didn't go to the Super Bowl, in my opinion. He doesn't want to go to a team that's just kind of scrapping around trying to figure out if they're going to go 8-8, 8-9, whatever it is now. It's like he wants to go to a team that has a chance, and he thought the Bengals had a chance. That's the first time I feel like we've signed a free agent that was, trying to win a game. It's like, wait, he wants to come here? We can do this. So I think really the Burrow is that guy, right? He is that stud. He's going to put the team on his back. He's not going to let people just walk all over him. So again, barring injury, again, I hate to say it, but like that's always the killer, and you can't predict it. But I think if everybody stays healthy, and even if all of our opponents stay healthy, I don't see why we can't go 10-7, win the division, and then leapfrog into a spot where we're in the top, in the playoffs every year, winning a playoff game every season. That would be phenomenal. That's where you want to be. That's where you start to create a dynasty, which I think the Bengals are right on the cusp of doing. If we can get Burrow and Chase together for, hell, let's say 10 years, it's unlikely, but why not? Put them together for 10 years, a nice 10-year run here at the start of Paycor Stadium. I mean, hell, what a story. So, yeah, I think I'm very optimistic long-term for this team as much as I am for 2022.
That's perfect. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and again, I would agree with that sentiment. So some of the examples I brought up were like semi like cherry picked, right? But
Yeah,
it has
that's
just
okay.
been like the Bengals just two 2 years ago were like the laughing stock of the league. Obviously,
Oh,
that they
yeah.
had the first overall pick and they got Burrow, and that really changed the course quickly. But they were like that matchup. Oh, you start your running back against Cincinnati, or because like it's just
Yeah.
get the game like the game scripts and everything else. But like, and maybe now that's like the Texans or I mean, I guess the Texans have been that way for a while. But either way,
Yeah.
Cincinnati was in that discussion. Now all of a sudden, it just has completely flipped. So I think it's very exciting. But I do think it is sustainable to a level that is very different than those other teams that kind of have these like little peaks and then they just drop off.
Well, I think a
So
lot of those teams are like flash in the pan because of the way their contracts were set up and the way their players were. Like we've got Burrow and Chase on rookie contracts still. I think that bodes well for us as a team, and I think there's really no doubt that we're going to re-sign them to longer deals. And I don't think it's going to be. I don't think Burrow's going to get a 10-year deal like Mahomes. But man, let's see how this season goes, right? But I'm saying like once you start to make those kind of decisions for your team, you're really locking into how you want to go. And I think at some point you just have to realize as a franchise, you got to go all in. We got close to the Super Bowl. We have a good stretch, but we brought everybody back and added to our only weakness. I think that's the difference in a lot of those teams that you mentioned is that they kind of were at the end of their gas. They were like just about to fall off. They've got kind of fluky and made it to the end.
yeah,
Like the 16 Panthers kind of come up to me for that. It's like they lost a lot of those players, if I recall. I mean, it could be entirely wrong, but I remember thinking like their whole team changed. It's hard to say how you're going to do when your team changes, but our team kept everybody that mattered and got better where we were bad. Can't fault him for that. That's what you should do. So I'm excited
yep,
to see what Zach Taylor can do too. I think he bought himself at least a couple years with that Super Bowl appearance. So, and again, I
yeah,
mean,
definitely.
he's had a rough go if you think about it too. Like the way he comes in and then has a pretty mediocre to bad year, and then gets Burrow, and then Burrow gets hurt, and they have a bad year, and then Chase comes in, and even heading into last season, there were a lot of question marks. Like, is this guy for real? Like, how long of a leash do we give him? We don't want another Marvin Lewis, and we don't have one. I think we're okay. But now also that's off his back. The pressure's off his back. Maybe he's a coach for a long term too. And I think all of that starts to become like, oh, okay, let's go do it again, right? Instead of how are we going to do this? It's when are we going to do this? And let's do it now, right? There's a
Right.
little confidence that comes with that. So it's a good time to be a Bengals fan, finally.
It's a really good point you bring up there about Marvin Lewis, who I think was a coach that probably had too long of a leash for too long, and but again, it's like, well, whatever. If the coach just isn't exactly getting the exact amount of wins and losses you're hoping for, but it still has a good culture in the locker room and with the organization, whatever. I'm not the one paying the guy, but like it just seems
Right.
interesting. But the NFL is such a results oriented business where
Oh,
Zach
yeah.
Taylor, if he had another ugly season last year, I mean, he could have been a goner, So I think it is good to have these situations see themselves through if the proper guy is there. So I'm very curious to see if Zachary Taylor is that guy, of course. And based on last year, I have no reason to think not anymore. Just because it all again
Amen.
back to the players being healthy. That's what it
Yep.
comes down to, right? But especially Burrow, like, we want Burrow to stay healthy for many reasons, right?
That's right.
Um, especially because of the fantasy side of things. That's right. Oh, they
That's
got the
right.
beautiful they got the beautiful white Bengal jersey there.
Burrow, baby. That's right.
Those were rolled out for just this season, right?
Well, this is
Is that the
actually last year's Color Rush or 2 years ago's
Oh,
Color Rush. I
gotcha,
bought it
gotcha,
when Burrow
gotcha.
was a rookie. They do have slightly different ones now where the black is white, but other than that, it's the same, basically the same jersey. Yeah, we got white
Gotcha.
helmets this year, so we're going to be whitening out teams. It's going to be great. I'm excited.
I, I love it. So yeah, so at the end of the day, we do want this show to be a fantasy football show, but I just
Right.
do like the normal football talk too. Now, from the fantasy implications, we're going to be talking about offensive players that we're going to be targeting at projected cost, or players on the team that we're going to be fading at projected cost. I know you're a big dynasty guy, but you can take the dynasty angle or the redraft angle or go both. So I would love to hear who you are targeting at projected cost for at least dynasty for now.
Well, I'll even play in a different direction. I think Dynasty and redraft are kind of the same, especially when you're talking about cheap players, when guys you're trying to get at the low cost. When you're taking someone at the 15th, 16th, 17th round of your redraft league, they may not even be on a team in Dynasty in some of those cases, because a lot of those players in Dynasty, you're holding them for the future, right? So you're going to take players over Hayden Hurst that you might think are going to be good in the future, like rookies, like Likely and Kohler for the Baltimore Ravens. Like I might have them ranked over Hurst in Dynasty, or want to hold on to them more than Hurst because I think they've got more potential, right? But I think at the end of the day, redraft and Dynasty are the same week to week. And I think sometimes Dynasty players forget that. Like you still have to set a lineup in most leagues. You still got to play the game. You still got to win the week. Like, what are we so worried about the future for? Let's go right now. So Hurst is one of those guys I'm definitely targeting, especially in tight end premium leagues, because I think he could be a dominant tight end in an offense that is going to be throwing the ball a lot. Now, granted, there are a lot of mouths to feed, right? We've got all three receivers that I'd mentioned, of course, with Chase, Higgins, and Boyd, and then mixing out of the backfield. But I think Hurst could eat in this offense, because who do you cover? How do you cover all five of these guys that are going to be out there running routes? So I love Hurst. And then on that same kind of tune, I love Boyd too. I think a lot of people are kind of letting Boyd fall by the wayside. There was an article that came out, or some blurb that came out, I want to say last week, where they were saying they're going to start running Chase a lot more in the slot, which tends to be where Boyd tends to operate. But imagine you have an offense where you got Higgins wide on the left, Chase slot left, and then Boyd slot right. And you got who cares what on the right? Like we've got a couple other receivers, but it's like, how do you guard that? How do you cover Chase, Boyd, and then obviously Hurst on the middle? Like, how do you guard all of these players with your two good linebackers? I mean, you just can't. It's going to be a mismatch all over the place. So I love Boyd late in drafts. I love Boyd in Dynasty, and Hurst too, of course, but just someone that you can get for almost nothing. I mean, you might have somebody willing to give up a third round pick. I'll take a third round pick. You give me Boyd, done. I'll take it. You know what I mean? Like that's
easy.
Fine
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm with you.
So, and he's going to be points. I think he may not see your starting lineup every week, but as we get to buys, and there's always weeks with a bunch of buys and injuries, and you're like, well, I got nobody left. Boyd could be that flex start for you a number of weeks this year, depending on your league setting. So yeah, he's definitely somebody I'm looking for.
Yeah, definitely. So as far as Dynasty goes, I'm interested in all the Bengals. Like you just ran through it.
Yes.
Burrow in Superflex, I would not shy away from taking Burrow at like 5th overall, assuming it's all if it's all like quarterbacks up to that point. I think an argument could be made. Definitely like him better long term than maybe Kyler or Lamar, whatever. Yep. I've done it just this offseason in a startup. I took Burrow at 5 overall. Mixon, absolutely. Chase, Higgins, Boyd. Don't need to repeat the stuff you just said, but I completely echo it. Now, Hurst, I really like, especially in tight end premium, like you said, as like a later option. If you have like a Komet, or you have like Jelani Woods or whatever, like a younger guy, Hurst can absolutely be a spot starter in that format, no doubt. Now in redraft, I'm especially targeting Mixon and Tyler Boyd. I have Tyler Boyd. I would be very happy with him just as like my team's like wide receiver 4. I do agree. Just like a pretty, I would think like you have a lot of floor, but there's obviously a lot of potential for ceiling with him. Sure. And again, we don't want this to happen, but if Chase or Higgins were to get banged up, let's just say a couple weeks, Boyd automatically becomes a wide receiver 2 type of an option, right? Yep. That just is not. I don't think that's like a hot take or anything. So I'm very into Boyd for sure. In Polly's playoff, I have him as my wide receiver 4. It was like a no-brainer at that spot, at least for me. So is there anyone that you're fading in this offense?
Fading is an interesting term, because again, in Dynasty, I tend to look at like selling more than fading, right? Like who can I sell? Okay. Who is at their peak? And I think in Dynasty too, I've said this, I said it all weekend even, but I said it in other podcasts, like don't hate the player, hate the ADP, right? Like don't hate the player, hate the price. And there was definitely some discussion about, in 1 QB leagues, especially, like maybe you sell Jamar Chase at some point here. Like his value can't get much higher, right? Like if he's the number 1 asset in Dynasty, how does he get higher than that? Like maybe his value goes up, but how much further can you go? So my logic is, again, to split it a different way and to slice this apple a different way. If you're contending, I don't fade any of them. If I'm contending, I want points, and they're all going to score points. If I'm rebuilding, I might look at moving Chase. I might look at moving Higgins. I know I've done a lot of trades, or talked about a lot of trades on Junkies, where, you sell Chase for Higgins and a piece, right? And so that way you're kind of moving back on the offense. You're still getting what could be a top 12 receiver, but then you're adding some depth to your team. So it kind of depends on what your team needs are. On the other end of that, if I'm contending and I've got a bunch of depth and I'm looking to, consolidate some value and assets on my roster, I'm fine moving somebody like I don't know, Higgins, Connor, and a second for Chase, whatever it takes to get that done, right? Like get some of that depth out there, but just give me those Chase points on my team, because I think that's the way it goes. So again, I hate to kind of caveat that, but that's where I'm doing. Like, I think there are some different fades that you can have on that depending on what you're going for. But again, I hate to say it, but Chase is really the only one. I think you even kind of mentioned it on the sheet. Like, there really isn't a lot of options there. It's even in redraft. I don't know. How do you get off of any of these players at cost? Even Mixon is going in the second round. That's not too bad. Like, that's probably right where I want to get him. Like, he's not a,
Yep.
if he was going in the first, I'd probably be like, all right, that's too much, right? Like, how does he, but no, people are pretty smart. ADP we're seeing right now is pretty on the nose. So even in Superflex, Burrow at 5th overall, I don't hate that at all in redraft, right? I took him at 3 overall in Scott Fishbowl.
There
I'm
you
like,
go.
hey, it's a live Canton draft. I want to have my guy. And so I was hoping to get Chase in the second, thinking that tight end premium and other stuff might have him come around. I got sniped by one pick. It was brutal. So I ended up taking Harris, but I got Higgins and Boyd and McPherson later on in the draft. So I got a lot of Bengals stacks there. So I'm okay.
I love that.
And again, with Scott Fishbowl, there's no trading. So it's kind of like you have to go get your guy. And I think, again, that's something else that doesn't get talked about a lot too. Like, if your league is just a quiet league that doesn't trade, or I know my wife even has a league where it costs real money to actually add drop and trade. Like, you have to pay money to the total pot for add drops. It totally disincentivizes it. Like, nobody wants to do this, right? So at that point, your draft is very important. So you have to be very careful with how you're doing it. And so, yeah, always draft for value, trade for need. But if there is no trading for need, you got to draft for need. I mean, it's just how it goes. So yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here. There really isn't much, but I guess it's Chase.
Yeah, in Dynasty, I'm not fading any of them. Like at their cost. Like, if I'm doing a startup today, I'm very interested in getting Burrow in the first round if it's super flex, or Chase in the first round. I mean, it's just what wide receivers have longevity. It's going to help you today and tomorrow. So I'm not fading any of them in Dynasty per se. Then in redraft, the only one that I'm kind of iffy on is Jamar Chase, just because he is being drafted like at his ceiling, which I think is reasonable if you want to do that. I just really tend to rarely come away with like a top wide receiver, a top quarterback, or a top tight end in like a standard, redraft league, or whether it's auction, salary cap, or like a snake. I'm very rarely going to come away with those guys. I will obviously more aggressively target them by trade, in the middle of the season if it makes sense to. But just as far as like roster building, I'm just not usually going to be the guy that ends up with Cup, Jefferson, or Chase. There was one where I was picking at it was kind of interesting league. It was a 10-team league, but there's no bench. No bench. So there's just gonna be a lot of movement, like every single week, especially if there's an injury or buys. So it's gonna get seriously chaotic. And that one, So in that one, I was picking 9th. I ended up starting Cup and then Chase because Jefferson went just ahead of Cup there. So that was like really just the rare time, and that was not super flex. So that was like the rare time that I did the opposite of what I normally do. So I'm really curious to see how that league is going to play out, but it's all kinds of chaos anyway. But so that would be it. That I just will rarely come away with them. I'm not against it, but I just would rarely come away with a Chase where he's going. But obviously, if you got him, or if you have him in a keeper league, you can keep him at a discount. Smash, absolute smash. I think he's the real deal.
I think it was a 4th round or 3rd, 4th round keeper pick because of all that talk we were talking about, right? There was so much concern last year. Is he going to be the thing? And we didn't know what the Bengals were going to look like. So yeah, he's a great keeper pick. And I know a lot of people that got him in Dynasty, and I even wrote an article for Fantasy Pros last year. It was like, hey, Jamar Chase at that time I think he was going 23rd overall in Dynasty startups. And I was like, careful, guys. Like, that's pretty rare. We just had Justin Jefferson do this. And I wrote an article that was like, hey, he could ruin your team. Like, that's a lot of risk on a rookie. It ended up becoming a wrong choice, right? Like, that was a bad take in a sense. But at the same time, at that time, the logic was still sound. Like, I stand by the thought process. Yeah, it didn't pan out. But the year before that, I wrote the same article on CEH, and that one worked. Like, CH was a really risky pick, and it has not panned out. So I think a lot of the time is you play the numbers, right? Play the percentages. Rookies are tough. Right. Rookies are really hard to figure out. And this year, the Bengals don't have any. We're fine. And even Hayden Hurst, who's a new addition to the offense, I think he's a pretty stellar athlete. I think he's got a lot of good head on his shoulders. He's got a lot of talent left in the tank. I think we just saw the beginning of what we could see with him in Atlanta. And then again, we're keeping the other 3 from last year, and Mixon also, and Burrow also. Like, our offense is not going to be worse. And so there's no reason to fade anybody. I mean, we're not talking about like a Josh Jacobs or Miles Sanders or something like even Gibson, who everybody is fading right now. Like
Yeah.
luckily we don't have any of that drama on our team. So it's very nice, very good time to be a fantasy player for the Bengals and like the Bengals and all that. So I'm a fan of where we are right now.
Absolutely. No, I think we definitely nailed it there. We're very realistic, but high expectations for the
Yes.
team as a whole, but also in the fantasy realm, which I think, of course, is warranted because again, I'm just trying to get as many of the of pieces of that offense as I can, for
Amen.
for all the reasons we just discussed. So again, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing
Sure.
your perspective on the Bengals, who, it has been a bit of a rocky road for you there. So I'm really glad that it's shifted the other direction now here, and it looks like it's here to stay. So obviously, I wish you the best of luck with your Bengals and with your fantasy teams. But before we get you out of here, just want you to remind the people where they can find you, where they can find your work, and all that fun stuff.
Sure thing. Yeah. So the easiest place to find me on Twitter at Andrew Hall FF. I'm part of the FF crew. I guess there's a bunch of us out there with the FFs on it. But yeah, I post a lot of my stuff. Almost everything I write, I post there and share it. I've got a link tree, of course, where you can go find all that. I am also one of the many hosts of the Dynasty Junkies, where we talk Dynasty every week. I've got a show tomorrow lined up. Should be a great time with Bob Miller from Dynasty Pros,
Oh,
talking
perfect.
just running backs and how they're going to impact this season and looking forward to that conversation. But we do good stuff on there. I think every week we talk about trades. And in one of our segments I'm a big fan of is Find Me a Trade, where we actually have a listener. We have a form that you can submit your team in a listener league. And then in theory, we just look at your league and see specifically what we would trade if we were you in your league. Instead of it being nebulous and saying, I'd look for a guy like XYZ, we go build an actual trade in your league. And there are a lot of times that we get people commenting on that back and saying, oh, that was really helpful. I hadn't thought of that or hadn't heard of this, or, and not all the trades end up happening, but some variations a lot of times get done. So big fan of that. And then again, all my writing is at Fantasy Pros. You can find me there. And obviously, like I said, I tweet out all my work. So if you're ever curious, hit me up on DMs. I tell people all the time, I'm here for questions. I don't do a lot of the Sunday morning last minute start sits. That's just, I hate that myself. So I don't like helping others do something I don't like doing. I
Yeah.
don't do rankings anymore because I hate rankings. It's just, they're so nebulous and kind of in the vacuum, and who cares? Nothing's in a vacuum. So I'm more of the show me the context. Let me add some skill. Let me add some knowledge. And then like after 4 or 5 things back and forth, I'll give you an answer, right? That's kind of where my head goes. So definitely takes longer, but I think you get a better answer. That's kind of where I'm at with it. But yeah, find me on Twitter. Easiest place by far.
Perfect. I love that. Yeah. So obviously, everyone, please check out Andrew's writing and his podcast, of course. That is Dynasty Junkies. Yeah, Andrew, I think we did it. Appreciate you coming on. Best of luck again, to your fantasy teams and to your Bengals. Uh, that's it. So I appreciate you. And yeah, good luck and keep climbing, everybody.
Thanks.